That now, right? Just so you know, Liam, this this is called 20 Schemes Uncut. Yeah, you've probably never seen, but it's basically I generally just ask questions as they come to me, and sometimes we say some things that are a little bit controversial, or at least I do, and we do have quite a large following. But what I don't do is put anything out that you would be uncomfortable with. So I'll show it you beforehand.
Because I'm as liable to say something controversial as you.
That's what I'm hoping for. I'm hoping for a bit of that. But just so you know, people sort of like it. But let's just say a little bit about who you are for our guys. We have quite a lot of subscribers around the world. Liam is the senior minister of 10th Presbyterian in Philadelphia. I hope I got this right. It says I got this off Wikipedia last night, by the way. You got your own Wikipedia
It's
page.
all wrong, by the way. But never
Is
mind.
it? So you've written more than 6 books?
I never wrote. I think there are 7 books.
So you've written 7 books. There you go. And it says you've contributed to something like 27 books.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
And anyway, conference speaker, defender of penal substitutionary atonement, which we like. We just did a conference at 20 Schemes last year on penal substitutionary atonement and child abuse.
Wow, that's great.
Why it's necessary to hold on to it. And
I think I went rogue at the time. At least some people thought I'd gone rogue in writing a book in response to Steve Chalk's view of cosmic child abuse.
Oh yeah.
And the fact that I named him was a no-no.
Right.
I got my knuckles wrapped, though I didn't apologize, but my knuckles were wrapped for doing that.
Well, he's gone off the rails.
Well, I know. I think I was right in my prescience.
Yeah. No, I remember studying at Moorlands about my Bible college in the south of England, like in the 90s, and everybody, the whole group of us was sent out to listen to him.
Yeah.
And I thought he was a bit of a car salesman myself, but I was always a bit of a cynic. But
yeah, I think I would echo that.
Yeah. I think he was on TVAM at that point, if you remember TVAM.
Yeah, it was all over the place. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, you also have been around social media for a while on this debate on the Trinity, which some of you can clarify for the thickos among us like me. So some of my friends take the line against which you argue. And so it's been interesting for me just to sit back and
well, when they get to heaven, they'll find out they've been wrong.
Exactly. But it's interesting for me just to sit and watch back, although I'm completely off social media now. I've been for about a year. It became too much for me, so it
is a bit overwhelming, to be honest, and I kind of self-police myself, to be honest, on it.
Yeah, I tried that, but because I'm a moron with a big mouth, I just got off it. I just do Instagram now. But anyway, I've been reading some of that stuff with interest. And I hadn't realized you've been there 10 years now. 10 Pres.
Yeah.
And you went straight there from England.
From London, from Duke Street. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, you don't probably remember this. And I say this every time I meet you.
I totally remember it.
I was I can't remember how I went for an interview at your church. Thankfully for you, never employed me. I think it might have been Steve Brady who.
Steve, I think it was Steve.
To go along to this church, and I went along to this amazing church, huge church, right, in a very sort of nice part of London. I remember, I think I went for a walk along. Is it Richmond Park? Might be nearby. I can't remember, but I remember saying to my wife, I think this might be beyond me. I was rough back then. I can't remember what happened. We had an interview, but obviously I didn't get the job, but I went elsewhere then. But then I didn't hear from you for years and years.
I know.
I can't remember how we met.
Yeah. No, I remember that. I think we didn't really have at that stage very many. It was to work with younger people.
That's right.
And
But I remember you preached on Genesis. You preached on the flood.
Really?
See, that's how good it was. I remembered it.
Wow.
And that's going back some years, isn't it? 20 odd years.
A long time, yeah.
And I met your son who was in the police at the time.
That's right. That was very early on then. That
Yeah,
was very early on.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
He
So
left.
now, anyway, so now you came over to the you left there and came to the States. I hadn't realized you were a minister in Scotland as well, weren't you, for a bit?
Oh, well, yeah. So I started out, I went to college in Northern Ireland, and my first church was in Belfast during the Troubles.
Is that Belfast Bible College you went to?
I
Or?
knew it was the Irish Baptist College.
Okay, yeah, yeah,
And I mean, I went in 1970, so it was right in the middle of the worst part of the Troubles. And
yeah.
where my church was in a scheme, Rathcoole. And at one point, Rathcoole became an armed camp. There were burnt cars, all the entrances into the scheme, burnt cars stopping people getting in, paramilitaries on the high-rise apartments near where the church was. The paramilitaries used to line up in the wee parking lot that behind our church building. During the evening service, you would hear them out there practicing their marching and stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, they, they burnt out the Catholics, the petrol bombs to the Catholics' door places, and they moved them out. It was a really interesting time to be alive. And
I was in a children's home in Belfast in the 70s.
really,
Yeah, in a Catholic one. So I remember it. Yeah, we were shit because obviously I'm from Ireland. We were
yeah,
how I came to be from England in the late 70s was shipped with load of children in care from Belfast over to the north of England because
yeah,
the troubles got so bad.
yeah.
So,
I think I knew that actually about you, but I'd forgotten it.
but then you went to Scotland.
So yeah, well, I'm from Scotland. So when we went to Canada, actually, we were in Canada for 4 years, and then we came back because of family things, and went to Airdrie, which was an old mining village in Scotland near Glasgow, and uh, that was a very very hard area. But we had some really bad schemes there around Airdrie.
Yeah,
And
still
we
there.
had, we had a lot of people from there converted actually. And I would say that that's where the work was done while I was in the Airdrie, I think. Um, and in terms of conversions and so on, a lot
That
of the
You in Kirkintilloch, right?
I went from there to Kirkintilloch,
All
8
right.
miles away, and Kirky we started a church in Hairstains, which was a scheme near the town centre.
One of the places we're looking at planting a church soon with 20 schemes actually.
Wow, excellent! That's really good. That's really good. We had a guy who was converted, Frank, who was a gangster. When you walked down the town with Frank, everybody in Kirky recognised
Yeah,
he,
yeah.
he was a real hard man, and Mary, his wife, was a nurse, so she could write. Frank couldn't read or write, and Mary would take notes, and they'd go home. And I tell you, there was a professor at Glasgow University sat in the balcony, and he used to complain about my preaching. He said, "I don't understand anything Liam Goligher's saying." Frank understood it. Frank got it.
Oh
Frank
man.
and Mary, they got everything, and they drank it in, and it just contradicts all the things of the world thinks. Spiritual enlightenment is not something that is confined to any class. It's God
Exactly.
overrules the wise according to this world in order to. Yeah, the reality on the ground is that the poor have often more of a heart for God and are more responsive to the things
Yeah.
of
I
and
remember being taught at Moorlands years ago. I did my first degree that by the evangelist lecturer that poor people don't read books and therefore you shouldn't ever, if you're a pastor, ever have a book in your house or blah 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 blah. And it's absolute nonsense. Actually, I've got a harder time getting middle class people to read than guys from my estate.
totally,
Once
totally.
they're saved, man, they want to they read anything and everything that you give them.
Yeah, my dad couldn't read. He used to practice copying out letters from his
Yeah.
Bible, but he understood the things of God, and he was.
No, exactly.
That's the thing.
Right. So I sent you a few things. One of which I remember, I visited your church in Philly. It was cool. And I can't forget your window by Tiffany, who I thought was a member of your church because that's how. Um,
We don't have any Tiffany's in our church, but
no, but
Tiffany's windows.
you've got a Tiffany window, which is like serious money. I can't remember the story of how it got there. Obviously, you inherited this place; it was already there when you got there. But
Yeah, yeah. I think it's one of the. There was a period, I think, in the late 19th century where there was a lot of really wealthy people
right,
who came to Tenth, and I say past tense, and when they died or whatever, they gave something and dedicated to a member of their family. It kind of happens in old
so
churches.
that must be seriously well insured. That pane of window, right?
Yeah, that window pane is definitely seriously well insured.
I was wondering how long that would last in Niddry. I don't think it would last overnight, but
Not long in
anyway.
most places, to be honest.
So you've been at Temp Pres. You probably get sick of this, but you're following in the footsteps of Phil Ryken, who
Who?
is it? Phil Ryken? I've
Yes,
here.
right.
Is it? I don't. If I'm honest, I've no idea who he is.
He's now president of Wheaton.
Yeah. Most of my guys who listen will have no clue, but a lot of them will know James Montgomery Boyce because he's like a little bit of a hero of mine. And so, what's it? Did you feel nervous following in the footsteps of these dudes, or was it just like?
I mean, I knew that. So I knew Phil Ryken, and I had followed Jim Boyce, I suppose, from afar. And my mother's family grew up in the Tent Hall in Glasgow, and Barnhouse came to the Tent Hall and took a whole month, I think, in 1939, just before war broke out, the month of August. And my grandma used to talk to me about Barnhouse and his way of preaching and so on. And I think that kind of, all my life, I knew 10th was on the horizon, if you like, because I knew about it and so forth. And the interesting thing is that when I came to 10th, I was there about a month, and an ex-member from Virginia came visited, and he had married Barnhouse's assistant or secretary, and had inherited some of Barnhouse's books. So he gives me this book with Barnhouse's signature on it, which was very nice of him to do. But I took it home, and on the front page, Barnhouse is written, "Read in Glasgow, 1939." And I'm thinking, those were the meetings my gran used to talk to me about. And the Tent Hall, of course, as you know, was right in the poorest part of Glasgow. I mean, my memory of the Tent Hall was the lines of people outside coming for meals and stuff. They did a great work. And in some ways, I think those mission halls were a precursor to what you're doing.
Yeah,
I think
basically with 20 schemes, what we're finding is those old mission halls, which were crammed in the 50s and 60s and part of the early 70s, we're now getting offered them almost on a monthly basis. They're just run down. They've not seen converts for 50 years.
Yeah.
Which is a shame from their heyday. But it must still have been they're big boots to fill, right? To go in and take on a church with that heritage. But you did the same with the church you were in London, if I remember. Was that some sort of famous church?
Yeah, they had big names there. Yeah. Graham used to worship there when he came to London. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I'll move on from that because I want to ask you, because you're from Glasgow, so you'll know Glasgow well than me. One of the things that our research has found in 20 schemes, we're just about to publish a book this year on poverty in the UK, and Glasgow by far has got the biggest problem of poverty in Scotland, probably in the UK, if I'm honest. There's close to 100 schemes in Glasgow, and very, very lots of church planting going on in Glasgow right now, by the way. Lots of it's in the West End, lots of it very trendy, very studenty. But why do you think the evangelical church has let it come to this, where there's just, I mean, there are swathes of Scottish schemes that have not heard the gospel of Christ for 5 decades?
I think there's a culture in evangelicalism which is shaped by the kind of upper middle class people who dominate the evangelical scene, who have power and money, influence, and who hold the keys of access to all of the conferences and all of the plum jobs and so on, and the model of church that they encourage and which they develop when they're planting churches and all the rest of it is a certain kind of church, and there are certain expectations in those churches which exclude anybody outside of an inner circle of people. And everybody else is trying to get into that inner circle or know people who are in that that inner circle. And the people in that inner circle they will not put money into something they cannot control. So they don't give money to things that they aren't running themselves. And they don't run things in places like schemes.
Which I find incredible, because I'm a Baptist, but Scotland is obviously largely Presbyterian, and I have got a lot of Presbyterian friends, and I love Presbyterian Scottish history, particularly Chalmers and Guthrie. And the history of the Free Church in Scotland is most of their congregations grew out of poor communities. Easter House, particularly. I mean, Thomas Chalmers had something very similar to 20 schemes when he
totally
20 church. I mean, he was trying to build, I can't remember what he called it, but it was basically planting 20 churches in 20 of in Glasgow's poorest communities. And the sort of Free Church is born in that sort of whole methodology of ministry. And yet you just said it. I spoke in the Free Church College about 5 years ago. And again, this is public record, so my Free Church pals who are watching this know this. And I in the Free Church College, I was asked to give a lecture on something. And I asked about 100 people in attendance, put your hand up if you've heard of Thomas Chalmers, and about half the room did, which I found completely bizarre. Was sat in the institution he founded.
Yeah.
And these young lads, mainly, being trained for ministry, know nothing about the guy and about his history of working with the poor. What do you think that's all about? I mean, I was baffled.
I know. And I mean, Chalmers, to read Chalmers' work and the details into which he goes as he details what poverty situation was like. I mean, he opened the eye. He was going down to London and showing them in London what was going on in Scotland.
Yeah.
And he took matters into his own hands, education, and he went himself. I mean, he wasn't like raising up people to go and do it for him. He went himself. When he was in the Tron in Glasgow, he was going into the streets nearby that were absolutely poverty stricken.
Oh yeah. And we because one of the reasons, because we run a 20 schemes run, I don't know if you know this, we run something called a Ragged School of Theology now. We train. We've got about 20 students this year from council estates around Scotland. We're training, and an English guy said to me, "It seems like a very silly name, Ragged School. What's that?" And I'm like, "Well, if you knew, you have to know Scottish history. You know what the Ragged Schools were, which is education for the poorest kids who weren't even allowed to go to school at that time, and these Christian men were at the forefront for fighting for the rights for kids to not only be educated but to hear the gospel."
Yeah.
It's just bizarre to me that an Irishman with an English accent has to come and teach church history in the land that.
Absolutely. I mean, it's true. And the other thing about Glasgow is family connection with us is Jock Troop was a fisherman in the northeast of Scotland, man in no education whatsoever, and he was converted. And God used him in a great revival right up and down the coast in the 20s.
What was the guy's name?
Jock Troop. T-R-O-U-P. Jock Troop.
Okay.
You really need to get that story, Mez, for yourself. Look it up, and there's a YouTube thing that runs through his story.
Look at that.
But so when he was converted, he preached. He just went off the boat, and thousands. I mean, hundreds of thousands of people were converted by him in the 20s, and then eventually he felt he needed some theology. He had no training or anything. And he went to what was the BTI, the Bible Training Institute, which had been set up by Moody in the wake of D.L. Moody's visit. Because D.L. D.L. Moody had a great heart for Glasgow. He saw the poverty in Glasgow in the late 1880s, 1890s. And out of that grew the Tent Hall and other mission stations to help with the poverty situation. But he also saw the need for poor people who did no education to get Bible training. Jock Troop went there and got Bible training, and God used him in Scotland. And I think one of the problems nowadays is that, well, the Bible Training Institute, I don't know whether it's still alive today, but what's happened is that all the training institutes, there's nothing for people who don't have the tools, who don't have the education to do it.
Yeah.
I believe you don't need to have the education to understand the things of God, to understand them deeply. But you need somebody who's going to have the patience and the vision to see that you have the potential to be a preacher and a teacher of the Word of God. And
let me give you, this is interesting. I like this because obviously we started the Ragged School for that reason. Lots of our guys, they're never going to afford theological education in the UK. It's priced out of their whole, I mean, it's just never going to happen. They don't have the cultural or social capital to even go there, never mind fit there, and have to completely readjust to another culture. And so one of the things, and I'm arguing for it in the book, is I'm not against theological education. Our ministers have to be theologically educated. But where's the obsession come from these days, at least, that you have to have at least a bachelor's or now even a master's degree before you're even allowed to be considered as a pastoral candidate? I find that particularly frustrating and almost elitist. But as soon as I mention it, I'm shouted at, well, you're being anti-intellectual. You know, we've got to have proper training. I'm not arguing against proper training, but there seems to be an intellectual snobbery that suggests unless you have these degrees, you're not capable.
Well, there's that. There's also the financial issue. You know,
oh yeah.
You have to perpetuate the thing.
It's big money, isn't it?
It's very, very expensive to run a theological institution, so therefore they've got to kind of find ways of making money, basically. So, but I do think I really think what you're doing with the Ragged School is vital. I mean, we've got to do that. We have to make it more available to people. The olden days, I think a minister would take on a few young men and train them himself.
Yeah.
I wish I could do that. I could do that by Zoom, actually, I suppose. But it would be that would be a way to proceed. Maybe
it's the model we use. Yeah, it's the model we use. We've got, including Nidri right now, we've got 10 plants across 5 cities, and all of them will have interns, both male and female, in terms of training and participate in the Ragged School. But it's just interesting to me that there's a problem in the UK. The middle class church is becoming increasingly more distant from half the population which lives in council estates. The theological institutions aren't preparing men and women to go into these communities. Yeah. They're preparing them to go into middle class churches and follow that system. Yeah. And so, you know, we need a almost reformation of the institutions that, like you say, are pretty much close to us. Unless you have got the right social capital, it's
true.
Breaking into Fort Knox.
And I think what people who have good training and education is also to be challenged with: is God calling you to work with the poor?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, and there's a cost involved in that. My first church, Rathcoole, my salary was £1,000 a year, which sounds like a lot of money, but it was we couldn't afford to buy our baby clothes. I mean, because we had to pay for the heat, we had to pay for the oil that fueled the heat, and everything. And buying books, I couldn't afford to buy books, you know. So there's a price to pay like that. But maybe God is calling you to do that. People need to consider that God's calling you to work in in a hard area.
I think one of the encouragements for us recently has been, I'll speak at several conferences around the world in the UK. And what I've noticed is when I usually ask, put your hands up if you've heard of 20 schemes. When I started this years ago, obviously no one's heard of 20 schemes, but now most of the people who raise their hands are under 30. And so I feel like, we've done our job with, with some of the older generation just haven't got a clue. Maybe they're not media savvy, but we're at least saying to young men and women, look, don't just go to parachurch organizations if you've got a heart for the poor. Come and work in local churches, and we'll give you the places, give you the support, and educate you to do it. To do it as well. I know we're only small 2-penny outfit, and we're only focused on Scotland, but we are seeing real fruit. And once this lockdown's over, we've got a further 8 plants ready to go. And so we're focusing in Glasgow in the next 10 years. So we've got 5 to get off the ground straight away. Let me ask you a question about money, because you may not have known this until I sent you the email yesterday, but you are currently the only Presbyterian church in the world who've ever given us a penny, which I still find staggering given what we're doing. We do have 3 current Presbyterian church plants we're involved with in the Highlands, in Inverness, in Dundee, and actually last week an anonymous Baptist donor gave $100,000 for the Presbyterian work in Dundee, which I thought was remarkably open-handed and generous. But we really struggle to get the Presbyterian Church on board with what we're trying to do. They seem extremely suspicious and very slow to act. And I wondered what that was all about, if you had an idea of that.
Maybe I just don't know why that would be. When I consider what they do give to us, what the church here even has given to in parts of the world that I think is pretty sketchy, and you're not sketchy. You know what I mean? It's you're kosher at every level in terms of theology and methodology and everything. Maybe people like me need to just be a bit more vocal in terms of getting the word out. I mean, even thinking about this conversation we're having today, I do a midweek for my congregation here, which goes around other churches, and I think I'm just going to talk about 20 schemes this week. But I don't know what.
It's not just a Presbyterian problem. I think it's the UK church would probably contribute less than 10% of our budget. That's how completely indifferent they are to what we're trying to do. Even though we're widely known now, we're theologically, as you say, we're theologically reformed, we're theologically rigorous, and yet still there's just complete indifference to it.
Well, I think the kind of people who could give to you are giving to their own things. And I think one of the problems is that the market has kind of been cornered in terms of where money comes from in the UK.
Yeah.
Most money comes from the southeast.
Yeah, no, I agree.
And all that money is tied up because it goes through the same hands, I think, and are focused on pet projects that I really do think that people need a shake-up. They need a shake-up and made to see that they have to take risks and give money that's not going to be under their immediate control. Yeah, I think it's appalling.
Yeah, well, the problem is when we'll move off. We'll move off from that. I just find it very, very interesting, and we're very appreciative as a ministry for your support and champion of us in the States. And I know our Presbyterian boys who are slogging it out up north. The Highlands of Scotland are particularly dark, as you well know.
Yeah, totally. I mean, our people, by the way, on a regular basis, people ask me when you're coming back to preach because they loved you preaching.
I'll appreciate that. They must like little angry men shouting at them.
No, you weren't at all, not at all. And in fact, they listen to you whenever they can find something online. They tell me they listen to you. So
I'm supposed to be
I'm
back.
not jealous. I'm trying not to feel threatened, but
I'm supposed to be back in April, but I've
I
been
know.
cancelled again. But I think I'm out. Supposed to be out later in the year. Be great to go back though. I love Philadelphia. For some reason it just reminds me of Scotland, and I don't understand. It's just there's something about it.
Well, it's the Scots and the Scots-Irish were very influential in founding Philly. It was a Scots-Irish
And it's a
place,
rough place in places too, isn't it?
very rough place.
I
Very,
noticed that when I was there.
yeah.
A lot of money play. Right. Let me ask you some other questions because I'm, we're over time really. But I'd be interested to know because we don't have many Americans who've come over. We've got a few who've come over who've really struggled with scheme culture. But what you're more settled now. But what were the big differences you found as a UK guy moving to the USA in your pastoral ministry that were a shock
Um,
maybe or difficult to adjust to?
yeah, I think probably it was adjusting a large church, and
Right.
in a large church not having as much interaction with people. I think the cultural thing for me was that the large, and it was for my wife as well, coming to a very large church. How do you come into that how do you make relationships in a large church? And my wife used to come with me when I preached in the summers here before I became the minister, and she would sit in the congregation. Nobody ever talked to her. In fact, I think in the 4 year, 5 years, 6 years that we were coming over in the summers, only one person ever talked to her, and that was to say that they were keeping the seat for somebody else. But because you don't know everybody. People know a little group of people, and that's the way big churches work. We
But
don't have those kind of big churches in Britain typically.
Duke Street was pretty big though, right? If I remember.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't really.
Wasn't it? But if you think the average church size in England is 50,
Well, it was big in relation to that,
it
but
was
not
big.
that much bigger. Maybe
But
4 times bigger. But
I was going to ask you a question. For one of the things we notice about Americans when they come over to Scotland, and you're Scottish, so you know this for a fact. Scheme people aren't backwards in coming forward, shall we say? Very brutal, very direct. I think a lot of our American guys who come over, I'll put this politely, without saying what I really think is, they they like to be told how great they are a lot, like encouraged and affirmed, and I think they find that a part of Scottish. It's not a very. I don't think it's a British thing, but it particularly isn't a scheme thing, is it? And
no, so my sense of humour doesn't really go down here because we kind of put people down.
oh yeah, yeah,
Uh, it's our way of showing affection. We put you
yeah,
down,
yeah, exactly.
and that does not go down.
And
That does.
sarcasm is very difficult for them.
Yeah, they hate sarcasm. I mean, and and I've got into a lot of trouble over that.
Yeah,
I have
yeah,
offended a lot of people that way. And in fact, when we had a bunch of people over, remember we visited you and we visited
that's
others.
right. Yeah,
And I remember one of the guys saying to our session when we got back, he said, I just want to report they're all like him.
no, they struggle. It took me the first few times I went to America. I I like caused a lot of outrage. Apparently, I had to have a guy with me, Matthew Spanler Davison, who you've met, who's like digging me out of holes that I didn't know I was digging because I'm just the way I talk. Anyway, we're gonna end up, but I want to end up with some advice. We get a lot of people on our who listen to this, a lot of young men and women who have, a lot of them have just been newly converted. A lot of them thinking about going into some sort of vocational ministry, either planting in the schemes or being women's gospel workers or training for training for the pastorate. And just what advice would you have for them? Just from your experience of what they perhaps need to work on or think about as they begin service for the Lord.
Yeah, I think I went into it. I always wanted to share the gospel, and I just did it wherever I could do it. I spoke to cows when they were the only people that would come to. That's where I practiced, and then with young people on the streets. I used to go out onto the streets and stuff like that. I think what I wasn't prepared for was the people that you had to deal with, and the varieties of people, and
Conflict.
yeah, I think you need to be prepared. So you need to keep your focus on God. The more I look back in my life, and the more at this stage in my life, I think the temptation to read books about other things that you think are important are a distraction away from knowing God. And I think that we need to know, first of all, the Bible is a book about God. More than it's a book about how to deal with people's emotions and how to deal with this and that and the other thing. A lot of those other things we can actually extrapolate from what we know. I mean, how to reach the poor. Well, you know, we know that not from the Bible. We know we're supposed to do it from the Bible, but how you do it, well, look around for methodologies and ask people questions and let them inform the way you respond to them. Don't come in with a preconceived idea of what you're going to enforce in this area or whatever. Listen to the people, observe the people. That's when you get into the job. I think that's the most important thing you do, because you want those people not to think that you've come as the great answer to the world and you're going to impose your ideas on them of behavior and outer things. The one thing that you can contribute to them is what you know about God. You will learn more from them. You will learn how to serve them from them in your daily life. I do think a lot of problems emerge when people think I've got to learn what the job looks like before I go into the job. You learn on the job what it's all about by learning from the people. And so I would focus in your preparation on knowing God, because that's what's going to keep you going in tough times, in times when you don't have enough money, times when you're struggling with looking at others who are more successful up in churches or whatever. I'm embarrassed. There's an element of me is embarrassed that I'm in a well-known church. You know, I just kind of feel, why am I here? You know, I'm just a wee guy from Hillhouse in Hamilton, and that left school at 15. You know, what am I doing here? And but actually, I think that at one level and another hand, well, I know God.
Amen.
I know the Word of God, and that's why I'm here.
Just one last thing, because I remember you speaking about this years ago, and I found it pretty good, but you might not even remember. But you say to those who constantly tell me that expositional preaching has no place in council estate ministry.
Well, you know, that's exactly what I was saying earlier about when my experience in Kirkintilloch. I was doing expository preaching. It was just the professor from Glasgow University was complaining about it. Meanwhile, ordinary people are drinking it in.
Yeah.
I mean, so I say ordinary people, you know what I mean? I hate even using that word, but people, normal people.
Well, people who the middle classes regard as maybe intellectually inferior and therefore think they won't take this in.
Yeah.
Couldn't be further from the truth.
I have found middle class people have far more obstacles to understanding the Word of God than people with less equipment, you know, because God is, I mean, learn from the Bible. God has said clearly in the Bible that he is concerned for the poor, and that it's the things that are not that will bring to nothing the things that are. That's God's way. God's way
and the foolishness of preaching, right?
Yeah, and it's the Word of God that does that.